If you're looking at this picture right now, congratulations! It might be one of the most viewed images ever, ladies and gentlemen. Now, this is known as the Bliss wallpaper, and if you're as old as me, you've probably used Windows XP at some point in your life. Now, this shows you how popular Microsoft Windows is. And to be honest with you, ladies and gentlemen, the only competition that exists is Linux, and you'll be glad to know that if you ever wanted to find a Linux user near you, don't worry, they'll have already let you know, okay? If it's one thing the offender registry and Linux users have in common is that they have to knock on every doorstep and tell people exactly what they do and what they're all about. Now, ladies and gentlemen, to give you an idea, I am a Linux user, okay? Preferably an Arch Linux user. I don't have my Fedora on, so you probably weren't able to figure it out. Now, of course, ladies and gentlemen, Windows is one of those things where I've spoken against, and to be honest with you, Windows is entrenched, okay? To give good context, there's probably viewers who are watching right now that are diehard Windows users and they have no reason to switch. But the reason I showed you that world's most iconic image, which is the Windows XP wallpaper, is due to the fact that it shows you how popular Windows is and how much of an actual grip it has on PC users. Now, way back in the day, it wasn't really uncommon that if you were in the PC world and you built your own computer or you bought one from the store, chances are you were going to be using Windows no matter what. And your only other option was to go to Apple and purchase a Mac product which had its own lineup of operating systems. Now, it wasn't until very recently that Linux has become a pretty good contender. Now, Linux has existed for quite a long time, but if you look at where it's used, it's mostly considered to be a server operating system, right? In fact, it's pretty much strong right there. And that's because it's open source, a lot of companies contribute to it, and it's genuinely useful in keeping a lot of those services we love to use, like YouTube, operational. When it comes to supercomputers, there's a good chance, 100% chance, that the world's top supercomputers all use Linux. But when it comes to gamers, desktop users, you're looking at people that are a percent of actual users. Now, one thing that's interesting is the Steam hardware survey. And here is an actual hardware survey of people who have contributed their information to Steam for people to view all they want. For instance, most of the world, 77%, uses NVIDIA graphics cards. In fact, when it comes to DirectX 10, 11, 12 systems, 70% of these people have a DirectX 12 graphics card with Windows 10. When it comes to processor usage, I'm in the minority, being an AMD processor user myself. When it comes to actual people who are using operating systems, Windows still remains at the top with 96.61%. But don't get it twisted, Linux is growing. Now, that number is going up to 2%, and while this doesn't seem like a lot to many people, I want you to remember, years ago, over 5-6 years, this number used to be under a percent. It used to literally be margins of error levels of reporting. So what changed in the last few years? Why did all of a sudden this number slowly start to climb? Well, if you ever looked at what Valve is selling, which is the Steam Deck, you probably have seen this become really popular. People buy this, people talk about it all over YouTube. It is effectively a handheld gaming computer that runs on Linux. So for all you people that have bought your games on Steam, you now can carry them everywhere you go. So if you want to play games like Grand Theft Auto, if you want to play games like Red Dead Redemption, if you want to play games like Resident Evil or Balatro, or really anything, and you have Steam versions, you can play them on this Nintendo Switch-ass looking device. But it's not the only competition in town. There's plenty of other handheld gaming systems, but Steam kind of comes at the top because of Linux. It provides a better experience, at least in this camp. But what about PC users, ladies and gentlemen? What about the PC gamer? Now, in the last few months, Microsoft has kind of started torching some of the cool stuff they've done with Windows and their operating system by introducing new features like artificial intelligence, unnecessarily bloating their operating system, and making something that is kind of a former shadow of what they used to actually provide. Windows never always was bad. It was always one of those things where after every other release, you would have a good release, a shit release, good release, shit release, at least from my experience. So about a year ago, I made a video titled The Hardest System, Installing the Hardest System Known to Man. And in that video, I provided a step-by-step process of installing things like Arch Linux, all the way from seeing it in a command line to actually using it like a functional computer. Now, the reason why I want to kind of refocus on that video again is I'm going to show you how to actually install Linux and use this and make it easier for you. Things have gotten so good in the last couple weeks, in the last month even, that all of a sudden, the reason for me even firing up virtual machines has basically ceased. I am mostly doing everything underneath Linux at this moment in time. So to give you a bit of history, the reason why I started using Linux primarily in videos, and the reason I switched to it is years ago I watched a video by Level 1 Techs where the host, Wendell, showed Grand Theft Auto 5 running underneath a virtual machine. And since then, I made plenty of videos where I built virtual machines where you could pass graphic cards to and game underneath. And obviously the usefulness of it has kind of dwindled down as gaming has gotten so much better underneath Linux anyways, and a lot of big online games have started to actually demonize virtual machine users, effectively kicking us out of online games that I actually use that software for. Now, I've only really used virtual machines to play 2 games in like the last, I would say, year. Those games were Cyberpunk 2077 and specifically Silent Hill 2. And the reason I had to do it was because of a technology known as DLSS frame generation. Now, to give you an idea, Cyberpunk 2077 is one of the prettiest looking games right now on the market. But it comes with a serious cost. Even if you have an RTX 4090, in order to run the game at its highest settings with things like path tracing, which change the way the lighting and the graphics are displayed, you need to be using things like DLSS, which again renders the game at a lower resolution and then upscales it through artificial intelligence natively or close to matching an actual like native resolution. You need things like DLSS ray reconstruction, which again adds extra performance and fixes up some of the issues that you see in ray tracing. But the real sweet sauce is something known as DLSS frame generation. Now, a lot of people call this fake frames, but it's the only way where you get the ability to run Cyberpunk all the way from 44 frames to something like 80, 85 frames. And even if those frames are fake, they still feel a whole heck of a lot better than running the game with 40 frames, at least in my personal experience. Now, for a while, this technology used to be exclusive to Windows, but lately, NVIDIA, of all companies, has released open source versions of their drivers, so you, being a Linux user, don't even have to have proprietary software. You can just run open source versions of some of the most amazing graphic software and get access to some of these really crazy features. Now, not everything is ported over, but I think for the most part, if you're a gamer, things work a lot better than anybody remembers. It used to be years ago running a game day one would be an issue, and nowadays you can play shit like Stalker 2 out of the box on Linux, as effective as you would on a Windows computer. Don't get me wrong, that game is still optimized to absolute shit, but at least it works pretty much complete between both sides. And now you don't have to do anything fancy to run games. Now, underneath Linux, for most titles, you can basically just open up Steam and basically browse through a list of games that you have. Now, there are native titles that Valve has basically got on Linux, but it's so good with their Proton software that you can run Windows versions about the same as you would experience them on actual Windows, except running them underneath on Linux. So if you want to play something like Baldur's Gate 3, by having Proton enabled, you can basically run this game through something known as Proton Experimental, or just Proton, which is basically a version of Wine that runs games in a compatibility layer. So if you play Baldur's Gate 3 on a Linux system, it is really no more different than playing it on a Windows system. And the level of technology is increasing to the point that Valve is introducing new technologies like that frame generation, but also support for ARM processors, so somewhere down the road, we might actually get Steam Decks that have substantially better battery lives and the ability for them to be lighter and run games maybe more efficiently. Even modding games has become so substantially easier that through Nexus, they actually have a new application currently in development that allows you to basically have a mod manager that works not only on Windows, but also on Linux. So for hundreds of those Cyberpunk mods and Baldur's Gate mods that exist, even Linux gamers can finally get in on modding as easily as their Windows counterparts. Now granted, there's still some, learning curves, but obviously it's gonna happen, especially when you have fundamentally different systems. But the fact that we're reaching parity in all these other spaces is nothing short of positive. Installing Arch Linux, one of the hardest systems that the community, the elitist community, is sort of hyped up to ever-loving hell, is so easy that you could download the instruction material, and instead of actually going through that super long process like I showed you before, installing this arcane software is so easy that you can follow scripts which basically automate the entire process for you. Now, the reason why I'm kind of showing this is also to remind you that the best resource for Linux to make it easier is something known as the Arch Linux Wiki. If you ever have an issue with what Linux is doing or how things function, check out that wiki. It actually works pretty well for even operating systems that are out of the scope of just Arch. So generally, if you want to use Arch Linux and just have it install for you, type in the words Arch install when you get to this section and hit enter. And all of a sudden, it'll get a script and it'll just do it all for you. So for instance, right here, it'll give you the option to pick languages. I'm going to stick with English. Do you want mirrors? Well, you can do mirror region. And all of a sudden, you can pick what country you're in. So I'm going to do Canada and hit enter, and it'll just download the Canadian regions for me. So as we're done over here, we can go down, go to disk configuration, partitioning, and use a best effort default partition layout, meaning that you can just let all of this handle for you. So what you do is you select a hard drive that is completely unpartitioned, like my virtual machine here, hit enter, and you can pick whatever you want. So for this, I'm just going to go with ext4. I'm going to do yes, let it do all the defaults for me. Again, you navigate this via the key, the actual directional buttons, and the space key. Disk encryption, if you're interested in not having people break in and look through your disk by stealing it away, you can enable that if you want. Bootloader, you can have grub, which I'll say yes to. Swap, well, of course I do want swap. You can change the host name to whatever you want. So for instance, I'll call this butt plug. And of course, root password, absolutely you should have a password. Should SOG be a super user? Absolutely he should. Confirm and exit. Audio, no audio server. Give it that good old pipe wire. Kernels, you can pick, you want Linux. I would usually go with Linux LTS, just if you want that extra bit of stability. But there's plenty of kernels out there. Do you want extra packages? No. I'll just leave it like it is. Network configuration? Oh, first things first, when you're installing, make sure you go in and just do desktop. And here you can pick whatever user interface you want. Do you want something like, I don't know, cute fish? Deepen? No, I'm just going to go with KDE Plasma like a standard little boy, okay? And just hit enter on that one. Graphics driver? You know what? You can choose specifically what you have, like NVIDIA, Intel. I just go with everything open source because I like everything on my computer. Just actually pick what you want, okay? Just be real careful. Just copy the ISO network. Use Network Manager because I don't want to be messing around with no terminals. Automatic time zones, absolutely yes. Optional repositories, make sure you enable multilib if you want those 32-bit programs. Save that configuration. And boy, all you have to do is hit that big old install button, hit that enter, and all of a sudden this will look like, it'll give you the countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh shit! And ladies and gentlemen, that's how easy it is to install one of the hardest systems known to man. So with a few button prompts, a few little settings and drips and drabs, you too have gotten one of the most complicated pieces of software up and running in a matter of minutes. Now, I want to just make a correction. This is not the hardest system known to man. There's other actual difficult versions of Linux. Difficult in the sense that they might be a little bit more time consuming. For instance, Gen 2 Linux is pretty great. I think Mental Outlaw Kenny has a great installation video that you can watch. This is mostly designed, and I'll give it to you, it's mostly for speedrunners who want to optimize every single aspect of their install. You want to shave off unnecessary things, this is entirely for you. You want to build every single package right from the source code, this is for you. There are harder versions of this, like Linux from scratch, which it sounds exactly like you would imagine, okay? And the only reason you would want to do this is if you're like the reincarnation of fucking Ted Bundy, and you're a complete psychopath. So thankfully for this, I'm just going to switch to Arch Linux because that's really what I've been using for the last few years. But I would say if you're a Linux person or you want to dip your toe, try any popular distribution, whether it be Linux Mint, Pop! OS, Ubuntu, just pick something that's popular. But most importantly, if you want to make things easy, give this stuff a try in virtual machine software. So whether that software is VirtualBox, VMware, whatever, download something free, install Linux underneath it, and give it a try before you actually nuke your system and switch. I think one of the worst advices that I've ever heard from the internet is just go for it, bro. No, Linux has its quirks, its positives, definitely its negatives. And if you want to make a proper switch, you got to learn the quirks and how to actually work the system before you get out of your comfort zone, which is Windows or Mac, and switch to something entirely new. When I started this video off by saying that ultimately at the end of the day, Windows has such an entrenched share, it really was the first system that came into the market and basically made a name for itself. And now, with actual competition, Microsoft really has to make their operating system good enough, lest the world maybe start considering switching over to the Penguin side. Now, to understand something that I discovered so amazing in my entire research for how easy this all has become is something known as Bazzite, okay? Now, Linux has already gotten super easy, but if you want something where you literally just install, plug and play, this is without a doubt one of the best distributions I've ever seen. And it basically takes the glory of what is the Steam Deck's operating system, or the Steam Deck's like Steam OS, and basically turns it for everybody randy to play, okay? Everybody can use this on whatever system they have. Now, to give a bit of history over here, Valve initially once released something known as the Steam Machine. Now, back in 2012, Gabe Newell really thought Microsoft was a fucking catastrophe, specifically Windows 8. In an actual interview, he ended up going and pretty much saying, listen, Valve wouldn't exist without the PC. There's a strong temptation to close the platform because they look at what they can accomplish when they limit the competitors' access to the platform. So even at the time, they realized that being just software on Microsoft Windows, they considered that they were basically a free rider. And they were able to basically benefit off of these platforms being open. But what if Microsoft one day decides to just shut down the platform? Well, thankfully, that hasn't happened yet. Valve realized that in order to make it possible for games to basically run under their terms, they had to support Linux. And it became a massive hedging strategy, and it was to the point where they first released things like these Steam machines. Now, at the moment, this entire page is completely blank, but obviously if you Wayback Machined it, they were actually working with big publishers like Alienware or big hardware manufacturers to create these Steam machines and sell them for a pretty penny. Some of that would be $479, some of these would go all the way up to $2,000, and some of them would be in the middle with $700 options. And sometimes, if you were a psychopath, you could pay $5,000. At the end of the day, these were just PCs with Valve's first iteration of Steam OS, which was Debian based, and it really felt like you were just using Steam in big picture mode. The reason why none of this took off was because at the end of the day, the PC market, specifically the gaming side, is not one that's primarily catered to pre-builds, at least back in the day. But also, Valve basically needed game developers to make games for Linux, which if you thought, back in the day what the user share was, it wasn't nearly as high. So at this moment in time, you could take the L, but Valve realized instead of taking that L, instead of, just completely realizing it was all forgone, they worked with code weavers, they took a technology known as Wine, and basically created the Proton layer that allows us to play a lot of these popular Windows games on Linux today. So Valve kind of put in that massive effort to make sure gaming is as good as it is now. And they still continue to put in that effort, which is why I'm making this video today, because some of those technologies that used to be exclusive are no longer exclusive to just Windows anymore. Now, to go back to Bazzite, if you go to their website, they basically show you that Forza works, Stalker 2 is running, games like Deadlock are running just fine. So basically how this stuff works is you go to this download Bazzite right up here, and you basically give it what hardware you're using. So for instance, if you're on a PC, you can download the desktop version, or if you have a PC that you hook up to a TV, you can download the home theater PC option. But one thing that's really cool is if you have handheld devices. So for instance, there's plenty of other devices on the market like this Legion Go. There's also the Rogue Ally. Now, a lot of these two devices come with Windows pre-installed, meaning that it's great if you're running games like Black Ops 6 that needs anti-cheat software to function. But if you're somebody that wants to actually have the benefits of a Steam operating system, basically run these devices with all the perks and boons, you can install Bazzite and turn these devices into actual Steam Decks, meaning that not only do these games function better, the user interface is far better, but a lot of those features that don't really work underneath Windows all that well, like suspending the actual device and then resuming it, because suspension underneath Windows for some of these devices is actually quite dog shit. And that's because Windows isn't really designed for these PCs in mind yet. But Valve basically designed the software, and that software works incredibly well on these systems. So when I bought this, using it with Windows was absolutely just not cutting it for me. But as soon as I installed Bazzite, it turned a device that I would probably have returned into a serious contender to replace my actual Steam Deck. Now mind you, this device isn't perfect, it's definitely faster, but the battery life on it is absolutely ass. But that's not meant for the video here, okay? It's a totally separate thing. So you go over here and you pick exactly what you want. You can pick any single one of these handhelds, even for your laptops, or if you want to experience this in a virtual machine, you can. You download the software, you pick what graphics card you have, and of course, you pick a desktop environment like KDE, which I recommend, or GNOME. And then, of course, if you want to connect this to a PC, you can choose gaming mode or not. And gaming mode literally is so awesome that downstairs, instead of paying money for a PS5 Pro and really going down that route, I have decided to build my own PS5 Pro and just actually connect this to an off-the-shelf computer that I put together that allows me to play games with a PlayStation controller connected, and it gives me that Steam Deck user interface on an actual screen, which works really well. I can download games, play them on an actual big screen, and using cloud saves, I can play down there and I can play up here just like I imagine. I can also play it all the way on my Steam Deck too. Thankfully, that's how cool the technology has gotten, and it's so fucking seamless now that it feels about as easy as it is to play on an Xbox Series X or a PlayStation 5. We've gotten to a point where gaming on a PC, you can make yourself a console experience that is, in my personal experience, better than actually gaming on a console at this point. And if you think sleeping and suspending doesn't work great on an actual desktop, you'd be surprised. It works about as great, if not the same, as an actual Steam Deck. Now, even playing older games on the PC have become absolutely just mind-bogglingly amazing. Now, one of the things I've been doing recently is playing games like Splinter Cell Chaos Theory, but also Chronicles of Riddick. So with technologies like Lutris, I can install GOG versions of these games, or actually the straight-up launcher for some of these other services that are not Steam related, and play them completely perfectly underneath my actual Linux system. And I don't know if it's the Wine translation layer, but there's a lot of support for old Windows compatibility, where you can play some of these older games that run better underneath Linux than even natively on Windows through their own versions of compatibility layers for older software. When it comes to things like emulators, because of the lower overhead on some of these Linux devices, when you're actually running emulators on a Steam Deck, let alone a PC, you can get better performance. So things like RPCS3 just kind of work better on these devices through Linux. But not only that, the actual interface becomes better because some of the emulation front ends are just absolutely kick-ass underneath Linux. So me playing games on my actual deck, half of my actual storage is set for old ROMs of PlayStation 2 games, PlayStation 1 games, GameCube titles, so on and so forth. So yeah, I think emulation, gaming, a lot of this stuff works really well underneath Linux. And not only that, a lot of software recently, as of literally 2 nights ago, things like Discord Screen Share with audio, a lot of software is being ported and basically becoming feature parity with Windows stuff as well. So look, at the end of the day, this video is not about me jerking off Linux, okay? I do that on a pretty normal basis every day. But what I do want to make this video about is basically to have shown you that gaming has basically become one and the same regardless of what software you install on your system. So when you first set up Bazzite, it'll ask you with this wizard, which I think is great because compared to any other operating system, this really targets the gamer, which is what this is designed for. And it really gives you, exactly what software you want, and you can pick what you want and get rid of whatever you want. So for instance, do you want game streaming? If you want to stream from your main computer to a handheld device like a Steam Deck, well, you might want to take Sunshine. Do you emulate? Well, get EmuDeck going. Do you want to have file synchronization for sharing cloud save files for games like Nintendo Switch emulators, where you can play a portion of your game on your actual handheld device, or do you want to actually play it on your PC? So you can play a bit on your main computer, and you can play some of it on your handheld. You can enable this if you want. You can have SCR CPY, which again allows display and control of Android devices. So if you're into that, you can. I'm just going to go with EmuDeck because that's really all I care about. So I'm going to go hit install, and it's going to just start setting things up for you. So all of this is happening in the background. You'll basically have to, again, follow the prompt. So for instance, EmuDeck, in this case, I just unlock. And of course, then it progresses for me. It starts up Steam, gets that going. And of course, the more and more you just look through the setup, you can basically let it do all of this for you. So we'll just go through towards the end, see how things go. And basically, Bazzite's all set up. So you can get this running on your gaming computer, you can get this running on a handheld gaming computer, or you can even install this on a computer that you can treat like a console. So towards the end of it, you can add things like OpenRazor. So if you got Razer hardware, you can get that support. OpenRGB. So if you want RGB control for, again, specific keyboards and mice you have, you can get this. Tablet drivers, steering software for steering wheels if you're a vehicle driving fan, system sensors, cooler controls for if you've got those custom fans, and of course, Wooting keyboards, which I don't even know what this is. You have a utility for that right there. So yes, ladies and gentlemen, crazy shit. And again, you want to install or set up a sudo password, you can. And of course, once you go to next, it'll ask you if you want to join, their Discord communities, reboot, install more applications, which again, it'll open up the actual store, the Discover page, where you can download things like Discord, Heroic Launcher, or anything else in this list. A lot of the most common software that you probably use everywhere else on your Windows system or your Mac most likely exists to some capacity here. If you wanted the Space Cadet pinball game, for crying out loud, it's here for you right now. And with all that said, ladies and gentlemen, you basically have your system installed right there. So it's not only faster than a Windows installation or even other Linux distributions, but if you're just here to play video games, this is already set and done for you. And see, we never had to open up that spooky little terminal at all. Okay, we never had to open this spooky stuff. Now again, to zoom out, we're using a virtual machine here. So again, I don't even recommend people jump into, Linux just out of nowhere. If you want to learn the, odds and ends and some of the quirks, then it's often best experienced in the, safety of a virtual machine. So you can figure things out before you actually commit to switching. I don't think people should wipe their computers just to try something new, because generally you're going to come across some brick walls. And if you don't have an easy way out, you're probably never going to want to attempt this. So give this a try, especially in AVM. We're getting to the point where even Mac gamers are finally able to play some serious stuff on their rigs, all through some of these technologies that are being built. What Valve is doing is paving the way for real independence and choice for everybody in the world of PC, laptop, console, handheld gaming. Look, it's not a Windows world anymore. It's a Windows world that has to share its limelight with actual real competition for once in our goddamn lives, okay? That's actually insane to say. But beyond all of this, with just Linux coming into the foray, there are obvious, problems, right? For instance, I haven't really talked about anti-cheat in this video. I think I've complained about it quite a fair bit over the last few years, heck, even last month. And the thing is, look, I think there's got to be a serious address by Valve and really anybody in the space, because look, it's not that you can ignore big titles like Rainbow Six Siege or Call of Duty Black Ops 6. I'm sure at some point Valve is going to have to find some solution for the Steam Deck to actually run anti-cheat under its wing. And that actual solution should translate over to standard PCs. Look, nobody wants to cut gamers out. So I think there's going to be a solution on the horizon. Whatever that solution may be is going to be something that will come with its positives and will come with its negatives. And that'll be up for you as the user to finally decide. Years ago when building a gaming computer, you absolutely had to use Microsoft software on your system in order to even play a game worth playing. But nowadays, for the first time, users finally have the choice to not install Microsoft software, but really decide what they want to do with their computers and really shape things, in their own manner. So, ladies and gentlemen, Linux has really gotten easy over the last few years. And if it's one thing you should learn from this video is giving it a chance and giving it a try shouldn't be so daunting anymore. Look, at the end of the day, if you're going to use Windows, use Windows. But if it's one thing I really do want to promote, and one thing that is a staple of my channel, is giving Linux a try, giving freedom a try, giving privacy and choice for the user the ultimate try. So if you're somebody that wants to cut the cord and finally own the hardware that you put together with your own blood, sweat, tears, hard work, and money, then maybe it's time you give your own software a bit of try. And look, it's only gonna get better, okay? You know, years ago, I would never have recommended the average person to even consider switching to Linux. But now, if you're somebody that just is a average gamer, somebody that plays a lot of single player stuff, even if you're playing the most cutting edge shit like Stalker 2 right now, it's really not a hard sell for me to tell you that you finally have the option to use Linux, because it is playing those massive day one releases actually on day one. And once the anti-cheat solution is fixed up, there really isn't going to be much of a difference between Windows users and Linux users. There's going to be some software like Adobe Photoshop that is just too complicated for some of these compatibility layers to work. But who knows? As the user base grows, maybe Adobe might be convinced to actually develop that software natively for Linux. And as Linux does grow, maybe it might convince a lot more other developers to develop native games and other native high-level software. But that's a pipe dream for the future. For now, it's about as easy as one could expect, and it's worth recommending. Ladies and gentlemen, if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike if you dislike it. Tomorrow we're talking about Pokemon Go and its links to the Central Intelligence Agency. If that shocks you, well, it should. I am out.